Hi, I'm James Crampton, Chief Rocket Scientist here at Rocketry Works. I'm here to tell you today about the assembly techniques we'll use for building the Toobish model rocket. Toobish is a 14-inch long tube fin rocket that uses sections of body tube for its fins, which creates a really stable and low altitude design for small fields on motors ranging from half A to C power. You'll find it assembles entirely with wood glue or craft glue or school glue, so really easy materials that make it a great kit for second graders or third graders or anyone who's building their first model rocket. So stay tuned, we're going to go through the steps and show you how to build this rocket in about an hour and a half. Okay, we're going to talk about the parts that are in your kit when you take it out of the bag. The most obvious thing here is the body tube. This is a 13-inch long, 24mm diameter body tube. That's about an inch wide. It's made of cardboard that's a matte finish, so glue sticks to it very, very well. You can build this with simply wood glue without sanding that finish. You also have 6 1.5-inch segments of tube fins. These are the same tube as the body tube, just cut into 1.5-inch segments that work great for your tube fins. You have a smaller diameter 18mm motor mount that is great for half A motors or up to C motors. You'll find a slit at one end, and that slit is where we will put the motor hook. This motor hook is a thin metal hook that will make sure that that motor stays inside the motor tube during flight. You also have a plastic nose cone that fits the tube perfectly, and you have 2 cardboard centering rings. These centering rings are going to go around the motor tube and center it inside the body tube, so that your motor is centered and secure inside the airframe. You also have one smaller cardboard ring, which is called a thrust ring or a motor block, and that's going to go in the front end of the motor tube to keep the motor from shooting through that tube if the motor hook doesn't do its job. Now, on the recovery side, we have yellow Kevlar shock cord. This is flame-resistant material that we're going to tie off onto the motor tube and have inside that rocket, and it's going to connect to the nose cone through the body tube. And onto that shock cord, we're going to use the included Rocketry Works sticker to stick the included Mylar streamer onto that shock cord, so your recovery device is secured to the rocket. And those are the parts that you're going to find in here. You may find in your kit a small 1/8-inch launch lug. This is a little straw that is used in some models, but as of the making of this video, we're not using that tube anymore. So we're able to do this build without a launch lug, which simplifies construction and gives you some more options. Okay, next I want to talk about the tools you'll need to build the Toobish model rocket kit. The toolkit is really simple, and it starts actually with the plastic bag that your kit came in. This 12-inch by 7-inch plastic bag makes a really good drop cloth, so you can keep glue off the work surface. The glue you'll need is just regular wood glue or school glue. Even craft glue will work. If you want to get fancy, you can use epoxies or cyanoacrylic glue, but really simple school glue or wood glue works just great on this material, and is really the preferred glue for working with kids. So, a simple bottle of wood glue, the drop cloth made from the plastic bag, and a paper towel. This is, of course, really useful for working with kids and glue. And the final thing would be just a pencil or a stick or anything you might want to use. When you're working with some parts of this rocket, you may find that you get more glue on there than you want, and using the eraser end of a pencil to wipe that away is really helpful for keeping your project really clean. And there's some parts in here, like the motor mount, where we're going to want to make sure that there's no glue on the inside there that can prevent the motor from loading into the motor tube. So that's really all you need for this kit. Now stay tuned and we'll go through what's required to do the build. Okay, our first step is going to be to assemble the motor mount. Now this is a step that does not involve glue. So the very first step, even though we're working on our plastic bag drop cloth, we're not actually gluing. We're just assembling parts that we're going to glue in the next step. So the first step in our motor mount assembly involves the motor tube, which is a 2 3/4-inch long, 3/4-inch diameter or 18mm diameter tube that will hold our motor. There's a metal motor hook, and this is motor hook that's going to keep the motor inside the tube during flight. We also have two identically sized centering rings. These are cardboard tubes that will slip over the motor tube. And finally, there's the 3-foot length of yellow Kevlar shock cord that we'll be tying off to the motor tube to connect all the parts of the rocket in flight. Now you also see the nose cone here, and this is actually used in this case as a tool, not a part of the motor mount. But we're going to use it to chamfer the centering rings. That is, we're going to bend the inside of that centering ring a little bit using the angle of the nose cone, and this is going to make the assembly easier. So it's here just for a tool. We'll use that in the kit in a little while. So the first steps start with taking your motor tube and your motor hook and put one end of the motor hook into the slit that you find in near one end of the tube, and then laying that motor hook along most of the length of the tube. And it's going to hang off the end by about the same 1/4 inch length that you see the slit is back from the front of the motor tube. The next thing you want to do is to chamfer one of the centering rings. So you take that nose cone and kind of bend out the inside of that centering ring so that it's not quite such a sharp angle and it slides on easily. Now that went really smoothly for me, and it may be a little trickier for you, and it's okay if you damage the front end of the motor tube here. What you want to do is keep the back end in a lot better shape, because your motor is going to be coming and going out of there, and you want that in good shape where it's hard to get the motor in and out. So with just one centering ring on there, I want you to chamfer the other centering ring, but don't put it on yet. So again, you just kind of force the nose cone into that centering ring and rub it back and forth, twist it back and forth until that centering ring is a little bit bent out. You won't even really be able to notice it, but these centering rings may have a lip that points in a little bit, and you just want to diminish that so that it slides onto that tube better. The next thing you want to do is take out one end of your shock cord and pass it through the centering ring in the opposite direction that you just chamfered. So that chamfered end should be on the short end of the string here. And then you can just kind of leave that centering ring there, and I want you to tie a knot in the end of your string. About 3 or 4 inches is what we're working with on the end here. You don't want to be working in the middle of the string here. You want to be working right here toward the end so that we've got as much length out of this string as we can. So go ahead and tie a simple overhand knot. And to do that, you put a loop in your string and then take that end of the string and pull it through the loop. Leave enough of a tail that you can work with, but not so much that you've wasted a lot of distance. Slide that motor tube through the beginning of that loop, that knot you've started, and then tighten it down. Doesn't need to be super tight, but then tie one more overhand knot in there. Again, you loop the string around itself and then take that end of the string and pass it through the middle. And with luck, you're going to have tied what's called a granny knot. And this is a knot that is really hard to come out, because this is going to be buried deep inside the rocket and you really don't want it to be coming out. So once you've got that done, you still have your centering ring, which is partially over your shock cord. Slide it over the back end of that motor mount. I'm sorry, the forward end of the motor mount. So at this point, both your centering rings are kind of in the middle, and you've got your knotted string sandwiched in between them. And that shock cord is sticking out right from under the forward centering ring. So that assembly is going to be what you're going to be inserting into the motor tube later on. But for right now, we just want this sitting here like this, ready to go in our next step. Okay, so after we've assembled our motor mount parts, we're now going to actually start gluing them. And for this step, we're going to need our wood glue or school glue or craft glue, paper towel, a stick or a pencil or something to, we're going to be using this pencil to smear any glue that winds up dripping inside that tube. Make sure it's smeared, either removed out or smeared flat so that we can get the motor in. We're also going to be using the remaining centering ring looking thing. It's a cardboard ring that is 18 millimeters on the outside diameter and even smaller on the inside. This fits inside the front end of the motor tube, and it's going to provide a backstop for our motor in case that that motor hook doesn't keep the motor inside the tube. So first things first, we're going to go ahead and glue those centering rings in place. So to do that, we're going to put a bead of glue around right at the end of the motor hook on the front end here. So that's right at the slot in the tube. And we don't need a lot of glue here, really just a tiny little bit. And if you don't go all the way around, that's okay. I have a fair bit of glue on there, plenty for what I need. So what we do then is, with that shock cord sitting underneath that centering ring, I'm going to slide that centering ring up until you get into that glue. And there's more glue there than you need, so go ahead and take your finger and smear that glue around. And that just takes away the excess. Make sure that if you get a glob of glue on that centering ring, wipe it smooth. You don't want a big glob of glue on that centering ring. With that glue that you have on your finger, you can smear it toward the same position on the other end of the tube, about a 1/4 inch from the end. And whatever you need more, you just go ahead and use a little glue from your bottle. If you get more glue on one place than you want, you can just use the tip of the glue without squeezing the bottle to smear that around. So at this point you see a kind of messy ring of glue around there, but just take your centering ring and squeeze it up into there. You'll find that as soon as it touches the glue, it wants to stop. And that's okay. As long as you put the glue in the right place, you can then just use your finger to smear that glue in. And here you see, in my case, I got some glue on the outside of that centering ring. That's okay. I'm going to take my finger and just smear that away. So that way there's not much there. You can just smear your fingers together or wipe them on your paper towel to get that excess glue off. And that's one of the beauties of working with this wood glue. So that has put your centering rings where they want to be. They're between a 1/4 and a 1/2 inch from either end. Exact precision doesn't matter here. This will work just great, just like this. Now the last thing we want to do uses very little glue. You really only want a couple dots in here. But what you want to do is, in the front end of your motor mount, where that motor hook is sticking through, put just a couple drops of glue. Small drops here. We do not need a lot of glue here. In fact, I got so much glue in there, I'm going to use my bottle to smear it around. And what I don't want to do is, I don't want this glue sneaking down into that motor tube. So I'm going to take some of that and just kind of wipe it up so that it's really just a little film of glue in there. So I've got some extra glue on the end of my pencil here that I'll just wipe into my paper towel. Now, you take your remaining centering ring, that's really called a motor block or a thrust ring, and put that inside the front of the motor tube. That's the end away from the hook. Your hook's down here. It should be pretty much flush with the tube. You'll feel it rest against the motor hook inside there and be more or less flush with the tube. You're going to want to look inside there and see if you have any extra glue in there. And in this case, I do. So I'm going to smear it around a little bit with the pencil so that it's not thick. You don't want a big glob of glue in there. You want it smeared thin. And with that, you can just set this aside to dry for a while. Put the cap back on your glue, and you'll be ready to move on to the next step. Okay, our next step is going to be to assemble the airframe. That consists of our body tube and our 6 tube fins. We've got our paper towel handy and our pencil handy in case we need help cleaning up messes, but mostly we're going to be using this wood glue very sparingly. We're talking about a drop of glue on each tube. That's really all we need. So for right now, I'm going to move most of my tube fins to one side. I'm going to work just with one body tube and one tube fin at a time. So I'll take my first tube fin and I'm going to put a small drop of glue right in the middle of the side. That's really all that's necessary. We don't need to use a lot of glue here, and if we do, we're going to make a mess that'll be hard to deal with later. And really all we want to do, you can stack these right on the work surface and just push that right up against the body tube so that glue is sandwiched right in the middle. And from there, we're going to go ahead and do that 5 more times. Again, a small drop of glue is all that's needed. You put that drop of glue right on the body tube. And I like to work upright like this so that we can keep everything aligned the whole way along. Again, a small drop of glue is all you need. And we're not, at this point, gluing the tube fins to each other. We'll do that in just a minute. So that was even more glue than I feel like I need on one tube. So I'll take another one and share it. Then I can put those in place in different locations. All this time I'm going along, I'm kind of making sure that the tube fins are lined up with each other. They're touching each other and kind of lined up with each other. Now the final bit of glue on the last of the 6, and you tuck them in there. Now it's a good idea to let this dry like this for just a few minutes so that glue sets up a little bit. Because if you don't, you may have tubes falling off when you start the next step, which is to use 2 drops of glue between each fin. And again, you don't want to use a lot here. If you use a lot, it's just going to drip. And you want to be putting these drops of glue right about 1/3 of the way from each end of the tube fins. And these are going to hold the tube fins to each other and help strengthen the whole tail section. But really, all that's needed here is a little 2 drops of glue. And one thing that just happened is one of mine, because I was rushing things and didn't wait for them to dry, one tube fin just fell off. I kind of pushed it right back in place, and I'm continuing going forward. It's a good idea with kids to take 5 minutes, talk about some part of your rocket flight. You can talk about how tube fins work, how regular looking fins work, and why we can get away with this. And the short answer to that question is any fin simply works by providing a guidance through the air. So air will be flowing through these fins. This wouldn't work as well at all if you filled these tubes. So these are not motors themselves, and a lot of kids think that they're going to put motors in each of those 6, and that wouldn't really work at all. But as air flows through there, it's going to be hard for this model to rotate around that axis. And so that's how tube fins work. It's just like for regular balsa or plastic fins. It's guidance through the air. Now one thing you see is I used a little bit more glue in some cases on that outside than I need. You see, I can tell that because it's dripping away. But what I do have is I have plenty of cases where the joint between the tube fins and the body tube leaves a little triangle open there. And that's what we're looking for, because we're going to slide the launch rod into that slot so it can be guided up the launch rod until it gains enough velocity for these tube fins to guide the rocket through the air. In any case, so with that done, with these 2 little dots of glue on the outside and 1 dot in the middle, we should be good to go. Just leave this drying on your drop cloth that's made from the plastic bag the kit came in, and you can cap your glue and let these parts dry for a little bit. Okay, in previous steps we have assembled our motor mount and our airframe, and we've let them dry for a little bit. It's especially important on the motor mount because we don't want these centering rings to be sliding around any. But it's also important on the airframe because we don't want to knock these tube fins off. That sets us back in our schedule and it makes it hard to keep pace. So what we're going to do next is we're going to insert our motor assembly into our airframe assembly. And we're going to put it into the middle tube here, but there's a particular step we want to take first to make sure that things are a little bit cleaner. Right now we have this shock cord that I've kept coiled up on one end, but chances are that yours may be hanging all loose, and that's fine. But it's really difficult to push a string up a tube. So what we're going to do is we're going to do that on a short tube right here by taking the loose end of this shock cord and inserting it through the front end of the motor mount. That's the end with the motor ring in there, the thrust ring in there. And we're going to pull it all the way through. So that now this is just this little bump of a string up here, and most of our shock cord is hanging out the back end here. This way it's out of the way for our next operation. And then later on, once this is all dry, we're going to pull that through. For right now, what we want to do is run some glue in here. And so far, we've been really very careful to be as neat as we can. You can be a little more generous with glue here. You still don't want it dripping all over, but I'm going to lay a bead of glue just inside all the way around. And again, you don't want this dripping loose, but a thin bead of glue all the way around there is what you're looking for. And ideally that's a little ways from the end of your tube, but basically once that's in there, it may help to keep it rotating around so you don't drip glue in any one place. You see it's dripping around a little bit. I've got about as much, if not a little more than I need in there. we're going to insert this motor mount with the engine hook at the back. So that motor hook needs to be at the back, and our motor block is at the front. We're going to insert that in one smooth motion. It helps to twist it, and then just get that in there all the way until both centering rings are in. At this point, both centering rings are just a little bit inside there, and my motor tube is sticking out the back. At this point, that's all you need to do for these. Notice that I did knock one of my tube fins off because I am rushing things, and I didn't wait for that glue to dry fully. So I am reattaching that, making sure it's that the glue is where it should be. But at this point, we have finished gluing on our rocket. I'm going to leave this shock cord still hanging out the back. And keep in mind that inside here we have some glue that's probably dripping. So I'm going to let the rest of this dry right on its side by propping it up on the nose cone, so that I'm drying my tube fin glue, and the glue that I use to secure my motor mount is pooling up right in here. But what it's not doing is I'm not hanging this upside down so that it drips down to where the nose cone will be, and I'm not allowing that glue to drip back inside the motor tube where it could block the motor when the motor needs to be in there. So I'm laying it pretty much horizontal, and your nose cone lets you do that pretty much with ultimate control because you can adjust where exactly it sits on the nose cone. I've got all my glue on the drop cloth, so I'm not making a mess. And right now, my shock cord is hanging out the back here, staying out of harm's way for right now. And we're going to let that whole thing dry for right now. And then our next step will be to pass the shock cord through the rocket where it needs to be for flight, and then attach the streamer and the nose cone. And then we'll be done. Okay, so we've been letting our rocket dry. We have our tube fins and our motor assembly all dry and ready to go. We've been drying it horizontally on our nose cone just to keep glue from dripping around inside, but now it's time to actually finish the assembly and tie our nose cone on to the end of the shock cord and attach our streamer. But before we do that, remember, to make things easier last time, we pulled the shock cord through the motor mount so that it would be out of our way when we insert it. And so we kind of have to undo that. So what I want you to do is take the end of the loose end of the shock cord and straighten it out some. You may find that it's a little curved. This shock cord is nice and stiff, so it's kind of easy to push it straight as long as you get that end straight. And basically just take that end and stick it all the way through. You may hit the motor mount the first time or two, but at some point you're gonna get beyond that motor mount, and you can just keep feeding it in. And at some point it's gonna come out the other end. There it is. And once you see that end come out the other end, pull it all the way through. Try not, if it gets hooked on that on the motor hook, you'll need to unhook that. But at this point, your end should be just your motor hook and your motor tube sticking out of the aft end of the rocket. So that said, we can move all hint of the bag out of the way, and we're just going to be working with the shock cord, the nose cone, and the streamer. So the first thing to do is to tie your shock cord onto the nose cone. To do that, it's best to insert it from the inside through one of the holes. You can go through one of the holes, you don't need to go through both. And then we're going to repeat our procedure for tying an overhand knot that we tried when we were securing the shock cord to the motor tube. Again, you take both ends of the string, you loop them, and then pass the loose end through the hole. And pull it down till it's snug. It doesn't have to be super tight. And you should have maybe an inch or two hanging off on one side here. You don't want to tie this in the middle so that you've wasted all this extra cord. Go ahead and tie it right on the end, and then tie it again. So again, you create a loop, and then pass that loose end through the middle. And then pull on it from the long end. And what you're going to do is that shock cord is going to be there's a little groove here in the side of the nose cone. That's where it should rest, and your knot should be inside that nose cone. Take the extra string off the end and tuck it up in that nose cone, and you're going to have a real neat end to that that will work well for you. The next thing to do is take your Rocket Work sticker and your streamer and just toss that streamer out horizontally and lay your shock cord across it. It should be perpendicular to the lay of the streamer. and just use your sticker to put it right on the whole streamer. You don't want this sticker sticking off so where it can stick to other things, but if it's right there in the middle, it's going to hold that streamer onto the shock cord real well. And with that, your construction is complete. As long as you've let the glue inside your rocket dry, you can go ahead and fold your streamer and roll your streamer and put it inside the body tube. So to do that, basically fold it in half once, fold it in half a second time, and you're going to have a section about like this. You could probably do one more fold, and you don't need to crease these folds. You can if you want, but then basically you start rolling. So you take one end of it and you just start rolling. And you may find that it bulges up a bit, so if you kind of crinkle it over itself, that's fine. But it should wind up in a pretty small little roll that's going to fit easily inside the end of your airframe tube. And then you're going to have some extra shock cord here that you just kind of feed in there. Anytime you're inserting anything into the motor, the airframe tube, you want to make sure it's nice and loose and then it slides freely. So I can kind of feel that that's coming off real easy. And it's going to pull the streamer out real easy as soon as that motor ejects the nose cone. And so with that, the construction of your Toobish model rocket kit is complete. At this point, you've got your tube pin section and your nose cone section, and your streamer is inside. But remember, if you have not waited the time you needed to let all that glue dry inside there, make sure you don't leave your streamer inside there. Pull it out and let the glue dry inside before you put that streamer in, because you don't want to get anything glued together inappropriately. With that, next up we'll talk about pre-flight preparations, and then you'll be good to go. Now that we've completed construction of our Toobish model rocket kit, we're going to prepare it for flight. What we'll need is our completed model rocket kit, our model rocket motor. In this case, it's a 1/2 A62. That motor comes with a yellow igniter plug and one igniter. We're also going to need 3 sheets of recovery wadding. This is a flame-proof tissue paper that will protect the plastic of the streamer from the hot ejection gases from the motor. So the first step to do is to insert the recovery wadding. Basically, it's going to sit between the motor and the streamer to protect the plastic of the streamer from the hot gases. And to do this, what you don't want to do is ball it up like this. You want the recovery wadding to be as loose as possible so it takes up as much room as possible. So take a nice loose open square and just kind of shove it in with your finger. Kid fingers are great for this. Adult fingers work okay, but they're pretty much the full width of this tube. So again, just keep it loose. What you want is you want that tissue taking up the full space across the tube and not bunching up a lot. See, this one kind of folded, so I don't want it that way. I want it fully bunched up. And you want it really loose. You don't want this jamming in there. Once that's packed in there, we can fold our streamer. And to do that, I would recommend folding it in half first, and then in half again, and maybe one more time. So we're left with a bit, a couple inches long, and these are 2-inch wide streamers. And then start to roll one end of it. What you want is you want a streamer that rolls up narrow enough it's going to fit inside the airframe tube really easily. And you can put it in before or after the rest of the shock cord. In this case it went in before, and everything should be real loose in there. When I'm pushing it in, I don't feel anything jamming. It's not, there's not a big ball of stuff in here. It's all nice and loose, so it's going to flow freely. And then the nose cone fits on without getting anything stuck out of here. Like if I put this in here, now this nose cone is going to be too loose because I've got some shock cords stuck in the shoulder. So I take that out again and make sure all the shock cord is inside when I put it on. So that way it's nice and loose and it slides freely. So now the recovery device is packed and ready to fly. What we need to do now is put the motor in. So to do that, we notice that there's 2 ends of this motor. The nozzle end is going to be sticking out the back like this. The other end is a wider bore, and if you look way down there, you can see a clay cap to that. And that's going to be what goes in the model first. So use the motor to bend that motor hook to the side and insert your motor into that tube. It may help to twist the motor a little bit to let it go in a little easier. Now you're left with the nozzle pointing to the back. So you take your igniter, and you insert it into the nozzle until you feel it touch the propellant. Now the 1/2 A62 motor uses a yellow cap. If you use a different motor, you may have a different color cap, but you put that cap right in the nozzle and push it in so that it pinches the igniter inside the nozzle. And with that said, your igniter can be pointed to the side, and that will make it easier to hook up when you're on the pad. And with that, you are ready to fly your rocket with recovery device and recovery wadding, your motor, igniter, and igniter cap. With that, you'll be ready to fly your Toobish model rocket kit.